And you're very welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby podcast, episode 5 of the new BKT United Rugby Championship season. And we're going to be looking ahead to another Interpro this week. Connacht against Leinster is the big game on Friday night. Munster against the Bulls on Saturday evening. That's on RT2 and RTÉ Player. Munster mired in trouble at the moment after 3 defeats in their first 4 games. We will certainly be talking about that. And Ulster down in South Africa for the first of their 2 games. They're taking on the Lions this Saturday afternoon before the Sharks next week. Delighted to be joined by Fiona Hayes and Eddie O'Sullivan. Guys, thanks a million for joining us this week. And Eddie, we were just talking to you off air there before we came onto the pod. You're back in the coaching game this season with Buccaneers. You had the first win of the season last weekend against Old Wesley. How are you enjoying being back out on the pitch running the team again?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the coaching side of it for sure. It's interesting because you're trying to manage the squad of Buccaneer club players, and then you've got provincial players you get back now and again dipping in and out, so it's kind of juggling act. So it's been interesting. I've enjoyed it. But it's Division 1B. It's a tough league, so it's like the NFL any given Sunday. You could win or you could lose. It's exciting.
And Fiona, how are you getting on in Ballincollig at the moment? Was it a draw I see at the weekend?
Yeah, it was a draw. Not a great start to the season. Look, there's as you people know, follow the women's game, there's a big gulf between the top 4 and the bottom team. So we had a rough start to the season. We were getting walloped, so we were absolutely delighted to get some points on the board, although we were 10-0 up with about 12 minutes left. So I wasn't too happy with the game management towards the end. But look, we'll work on that and hopefully we can push on from here.
Good stuff. Well, look, speaking of rough starts of the season, I think that's probably the easiest segue to get to Munster. I know we have an Interpro, but God Almighty, just with the way Munster started this season, they really are the talking point so far. Eddie, so 3 defeats in 4. From the very start over the summer, I think pretty much everyone around Munster, anyone who watched rugby, knew it was going to take time to bed things in. But I don't think many people would have envisaged 3 defeats in the first 4 games, those 3 defeats being away to Cardiff, to Dragons and to Connacht. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, I think if you look at the fixture list for Munster, it was kind of, maybe not 4 they take to the bank, but at least maybe 3 they take to the bank, compared to Connacht's start to the season, which has been like horrendously difficult. Going away up to Ravenhill and then off to South Africa for 2 games. So looking at both provinces, Munster had the easier start and they turned out to make the worst of it, It's hard to know what to say that hasn't been said already, but I suppose there's a couple of things that are worrying. One is this is not a whole new coaching ticket. Rowntree has been on deck there for a while, so you would think that he had a pretty clear vision of what he wanted to put into place. It's not like a guy coming in for the first time and try to set out his stall. So it'll take time argument isn't as strong as it would normally be for a new coaching ticket. The second thing is I think that RTÉ they've won 1 from 4. You'd like to think that week on week they've been improving a little bit, but the problem is that it's hard to put your finger on where they're getting better, and it's a horrible thing to say, but I think you have to say it, is that they're actually behind where they were when they ended last season. They're not even where they were at the end of last season. And they had a pre-season as well, which is disrupted by players being away, but every province has to deal with that. So it's just like a bit of a malaise. You could flay them on many fronts, but I just worry that they're not really showing any part of their game that you think is really, they've really buttoned this down. Probably last weekend was probably the most worrying performance in Galway. And I mean, going to the sports ground, it's a tough place to go, but Munster have been there many times before and got the job done. But I'm trying to think, their lineup was in trouble. Their defensive lineup didn't really function at all. Their scrum was in trouble. Their defence was in trouble. Parts of the game that Munster really don't get bullied. They get bullied around up front and the maul and stuff. And then in attack, they were very one-dimensional. I'm just trying to trawl through the wreckage and see where you could pick something that you say, well, this is something that you can see. Now, the worrying thing for that for Munster is every week that ticks by and they don't start to click those pieces into place, the engine doesn't start pouring in some way. The pressure builds and the players, feel the pressure more, and it's harder to start the engine then, you know. So I have to say it is worrying for them. And then there's the ticking time bomb of Europe in the background, you know. This getting into Europe is really huge for Munster, and already there's talk that, you know, it's going to be an uphill climb, especially with the South African teams playing so well, and, you know, Leinster and Ulster fighting at the top probably to be the guaranteed team, you know. So it's not a pretty picture. I hate to say it, it's not a pretty picture.
Yeah, and Fiona, like a couple of worrying things that Eddie mentioned there, and one of them being that it's not just one element of their game that is holding them back. Like, I think, you know, there were times maybe in the last few years where they had an excellent defense and they just weren't really firing in attack, and it was that one element of the game that was just pulling them back. But as Eddie said there, like the attack has obviously been poor. That's been the main part. But looking through the stats of the URC this season, their discipline has been horrendous. Only Zebra have conceded more penalties in the competition than them this year. Their line out is all over the place. I think it's just one or two teams have lost more line outs than them this season. So they're struggling to A, get primary possession, and B, they're struggling to keep a hold of the ball when they actually have it. And then they're also conceding, you know, they've been falling off tackles all over the place this season as well. So there are so many different areas of the game that are struggling to come together at the moment.
Yeah, that's it, Neil. And I suppose the big, you know, the stats as well, the big stat that stood out to me after the 4 games is that 86 missed tackles. I mean, that isn't a Munster thing we've seen in the past, especially in those games that were before them. You know, they would have been kind of games they would have looked at winning. And obviously no game is easy, but it would have been one they had in the bank to maybe come away, go over, get the job done and come home. And that didn't happen. And the pressure seems to be building, and it's the performance just isn't there. I mean, you talked about set piece. I mean, last weekend we saw obviously Finlay Bealham can take great credit in his performance, but just the scrum was dismantled. You know, Roundtree has worked hard in the past around the area of the maul, and I saw it improve when he came in, and especially defense of the maul, and that seems to be gone out the window as well. They're not stopping at its source. There's a lot of things missing, and it's almost like they've an overload of information. I think, Neil, that maybe they need to go back to basics and start looking at those simple things like the tackle area, you know, the ruck ball. They're missing cleanouts as well, discipline. Although you might have these great ideas and how to attack, and, you know, that's been the focus in the past. Oh, Munster are lacking this, and, you know, sometimes, but we're not getting gain line, we're not getting the basics, we're not getting our scrum right, we're not getting our line out. So it's time, I think they're going to have to go back and look at the basics, because they need to start winning these games now.
But yeah. I think the basics, Fiona, for me is, if one of my big criticisms of Munster last year from early in the season, and it, you know, people were upset about it because, you know, it was criticising Munster. But the fact was, I looked at the source of Munster's tries last year, and Munster's game plan last year, attacking game plan, was very, very simple. They had fantastic ball retention. Their ball retention was in the high 90s. So they just held on to the ball, nothing spectacular. They just ran at you around the halfway line. They kept pounding away until you made a mistake and gave up a penalty. And that was their main source of entry to the other team's 22. And then, you know, penalty into the corner, maul, try, or maul, pick and jam, try. So the source of all their scores really are not, all is unfair, but a lot of their scores were their capacity to build pressure around the middle of the field until you cracked and gave away a penalty. And then they got into the kill zone, as I call it, and they were fantastic at getting into the kill zone and really punishing you. You know, they're so good in around 10 meters out. Munster are as good as any team in the world. And I was saying, okay, well, that's going to get them so far, and that's all it did, got them so far. And you kind of think, okay, now it's going to be a shift here. They're going to bring something else to the party. But probably the Zebra game was the one that was like, I was just saying, like, it was a mirror image of last year, except it was worse. Because the Zebra game, they were 21 points up after like 20 minutes. And they were all the same tries. Penalty, ball to the corner, maul, try, or one-off runners, pick and jam, try. They're 21 points up. And there's an hour left in the game. And they didn't score again. And they had 3 chances in the second half to get a bonus point, where they had 3, you know, kill zone positions that you call from Munster. And they butchered the 3 of them. They lost the line out. They fumbled another ball. So it was like they just didn't even get the bonus point in the game, where you would have put your house on Munster to get a bonus point against Zebra with an hour left in the game. So that was, to me, was alarm bells again, you know. And the attack, I think I'm looking at the attack, and I know Prendy's only in the door, and he's a great coach. I don't know at the moment it's not clicking for them because they're not running. I'm not seeing any innovation. That's like they're running a 1-3-3-1 basic attack, which like every team in the world is running. There's nothing spectacular, but they're not even executing that well, and that's their problem. They can't seem to break teams down with it. Where other teams break teams down with it, there's variations on it, but. You saw how Leinster last week dismantled the
Sharks.
Sorry, dismantled the Sharks. Basically by running a similar pattern, but by just being more clinical about their execution and their rolling plays. So there's nothing I'm seeing in we say the Munster attack that looks anything resembling that, and also the same Ulster attack is firing very well also. It was only a game against Leinster where it was an absolute monsoon that no team could play that night. So that's the thing for me in the attack. That's the one thing we're all looking at was the Munster attack. Where's it going? And zero evidence at the moment. I hate to say it, there's zero evidence that they're actually going anywhere.
Yeah, and Eddie, with that as well, like this is one of the first few times, like I'm at home this weekend, and I'm actually thinking about will I go up and watch the Bulls game or not? I probably will up in Thomond Park, but it's just when I'm watching every other Irish province over the weekend, and the likes of Ulster and especially Leinster, they're so exciting in attack, and Munster just don't seem to be bringing anything to the plate. And with rugby, when you're up in Thomond Park, you want to be roaring, you want to be shouting. Obviously, you love the physical contacts, but the game has evolved, so it's tries that get people excited now, and it just doesn't seem to be happening. And I know hopefully with Thomond Park at the weekend they might bring a bit more, and they haven't had a game there yet this season, but if they don't, they could be in serious trouble with getting the fans in the door as well.
Well, as well, the Bulls are coming off a loss last week.
Yeah.
And like they're away from home, so they'll always batten down the hatches and try and get some result away from home. And they'll see Munster as a wounded beast at the moment. And okay, Munster might respond to that, but you just wonder where that response is going to come from. Like the South African teams, just to pivot away from Munster, South African teams have brought a really different dimension to the URC now. There's no doubt about it. This year, I was saying last year, they took them a while to get their feet under the table. The start of the season last year was very unwieldy. They struggled. They now know what it's like to come up here and play in the winter. They know what they need to do when they get us down there. And they've started the season well. They're looking towards Europe as well. So it's a much tougher league. And the idea of going on a kind of a bit of a cannonball run over the next, 2 months from Munster and suddenly getting into the top reach of the league is going to be a much steeper hill to climb now, and that's extra pressure on the team.
Yeah, and like it's not. If you look at just to go back to what we were saying right at the very start of this, with the fixtures they had, that they were the winnable fixtures on paper, and their next 3 games, they're looking at the Bulls this week. They're against Leinster at the Aviva Stadium next week, and then they're hosting Ulster the week after that. That brings you up to the international break, and the games continue to be tough then once they're back in at the end of November and into December. The worrying thing is it's not a complete exaggeration. It's not hyperbole, Fiona, to suggest that Munster could realistically be heading into the international break in November, having won 1 of 7 games to start the season.
Yeah, and that's the reality of it, Neil. Like as we said, when you're looking at the fixtures, even after the first couple of games, I was thinking, okay, probably could take Connacht away. I know they're excellent in the sports ground, but I was thinking probably that's one. Leinster in the Viva. I mean, it's not really a place that Munster fans like to go, and we haven't got much change up there either. So obviously you go into all these games thinking you're winning it, but even Ulster at home, I would have thought early on in the season, okay, Thomond Park, that'll bring it. But I'm looking at these games now, and I'm wondering, can they win any of them? They're going into this break, and they could be right at the bottom. And if that's the case, how is confidence going to build on that? Because that's going to have a knock-on effect, and it's also going to have a knock-on effect on the internationals as well going into this. I mean, if we know Farrell likes to pick on form, there isn't really anybody putting their hand up in the air. I know some of the guys obviously were away on a tough summer tour, but there isn't any of the fringe players putting their hand up at the minute saying, look, have a look at me. Whereas we're seeing this in all the other provinces. When we're talking about rugby week in, week out, we're talking about the likes of McCloskey. I'm looking at Doak on the emerging tour. You know, there's guys playing really, really good rugby. It's almost like there's a confidence issue with some of the players in Munster, and there's no one having absolute man of the match performances, I don't think.
Yeah, and just to finish up on Munster, Eddie, just Fiona mentioned the Emerging Ireland tour. The coaches at Munster haven't used this as an excuse. Anytime it has actually been brought up in press conferences, they've kind of wisely changed the subject. I'm going to bring this up as devil's advocate. Would you feel pretty aggrieved if you were coaching Munster at the moment and you were having to start, like, it's no offense on Connor Phillips or Patrick Campbell, but two academy kids for big games, must-win games, when you have the likes of Shane Daly and Calvin Nash over with the Emerging Ireland tour, while you also have a pretty massive injury list of back three players at the moment. Like, yeah, as poor as they've been on the pitch, in part, have they been forced to do this with one hand tied behind their back?
Yeah, I think Munster, will probably feel a bit more aggrieved than most provinces, although I think the whole tour itself, I know they won the 3 games, but the opposition, was pretty average. I think the timing of it was mistimed, like stripping guys out of the provinces at the start of the season. I thought was a pretty bad idea. It was a last minute thing as well. Like, it came out of the blue. Now, none of the provinces are going to say anything or criticise it. They're not going to criticise the RFU. I think, that's not the done thing anymore. Everybody's kept on side in the media. But I think all the provinces are fuming over it. And Munster probably feel a little more aggrieved, given, as you say, you outlined the weaknesses they have in their squad, and end up having to put young players in. The other thing for Munster is when these emerging players come back, are the injuries fixed? Is that going to move the dial much for Munster? I think
we'll find it. We'll find out this weekend how much of an impact.
But I think the emerging tour, to me, was a bit of a vanity project at the end of the day. Those players got experience, have been away, together and playing, but I think anyone's going to look back in this tour as a game changer for Irish rugby. I think it's just mistimed. It put the province under pressure that they need to be under to start the season. And how many of those players are going to the next World Cup that were away in South Africa? I don't know. Is it that going to be the defining moment to get them on the plane to France? I doubt it.
Yeah, we'll move on to. I recognize we have been pretty negative for these last first 20 minutes of the podcast, so we'll move on to something a bit more positive now. And Connacht actually getting that first win of the season, and bloody deservingly so. I mean, it was a 9-point win, and if you consider Jack Carty left 2 conversions and a penalty, pretty kickable ones as well, that he put wide off the tee, like, that could have been an even more resounding win. How impressive were Connacht for you, Fiona, or was it in large part down to poor Munster play?
No, look, Connacht were aggressive. They went onto that pitch. They wanted a bit more. They had standout players. I thought Gavin Thornby was absolutely excellent. I thought, obviously I mentioned Beelum earlier. It's probably one of the best games I've seen him, even carry wise. I know scrum wise, but even seeing him around the pitch. Heffernan as well was excellent in the line out. They were at home, obviously, playing on this new 4G pitch, which I might say looked absolutely fantastic as well. I thought it was going to be a cracking game. I thought there was going to be loads of tries scored on that, But look, you have to give credit where it's due. You can talk about how bad Munster were. Connacht aren't going to go back and review the game and say that was one of the best games we've ever played. There was a lot of their strike plays off set piece. There was a lot of errors. They would have said that. We talked about Carty. Good to see him back, but he would have missed a few kicks that obviously could have stand if the score was tighter. So they just went out there, they went about their business, and they were clinical. They were efficient, and they got the job done, and they played the referee as well. So fair play to them, standout players, and a really, really good game. Munster obviously weren't at their best, but Connacht have to take pride in how they went out and finished off the game, and especially to get that try right at the end as well off the maul.
Yeah, and if we're talking about just the simple things as well, Eddie, I think it was Dave Heffernan, the Connacht hooker, who was doing press there in the last couple of days, and he just mentioned specifically about they had a bit more of a chip on their shoulder, that they were kind of read the riot act after a few kind of meek performances, particularly in the forwards in the opening rounds. And I think you could see it, that they had that bit of a nasty edge back to them on Friday night.
Well, I think it was a kind of a watershed game for Connacht last Friday night. Like, they've had a very bad start to the season as well. Let's not like sugarcoat it. Like,
they had the tough fixtures list to go with it.
They did what they did is they got basically demolished in all those fixtures by and large. You know, I mean, okay, you could say their second South African game was a bit better, but they look very vulnerable. And the things that we talked about last year, Connacht's defence was pretty shambolic in the first three games. They were like they were kind of self-inflicted wounds in their first three games. So I think they had to make a statement on Friday night, and they did make the statement. Credit where credit is due. I think you have to temper what you say about Connacht at the moment, because I think Munster were very poor. Now, you could say, did Connacht make Munster look very poor? I wouldn't buy into that completely. I'd say that, you know, Connacht did the things that they wanted to get done. They would have focused on, let's get our set piece right. They got their set piece right. Let's take advantage if we can of the scrum. They got that. They defended much better, although Munster didn't ask them any particularly difficult questions except make your tackles, which has been a problem for Connacht. But so I think they would have went out. It was a very solid performance by Connacht, and it got it done. It got it done very comfortably, though, because you're right. Jack Carty left 7 points behind off the tee, which he would have probably kicked with his eyes closed, you know, last year. And then there was late in the game, they had another kick for a penalty, and they went to the corner and lost the line-out. So you could tag another 10 points onto that score, and it wouldn't have flattered Connacht. So it could have been 30 points to 11. But I think they'll take a lot out of what the things they got right against Munster. But I don't think they should get carried away with it, because I think the real test, obviously, is coming up on Friday night. Yeah. Like, if they put in a big shift against Leinster, and I don't know if they have to beat Leinster Friday night. No one's thinking they're going to beat them. But if they were to put a really heavy shift in and keep that game very competitive, you know, like right to the wire, you'd say, no, okay, they've turned the corner here. Like, Leinster at the moment are very hard to beat no matter where they play. So I would say they're looking for a kind of build on last week. They're not getting carried away. I think the message in Connacht this week will be, look, we got a lot of things right last week. Let's build on it. Let's not go backwards anywhere and see where we get against Leinster. I mean, if they were to beat Leinster, it would be a major shift in the season for them. But I don't think that's really the recipe. They just need to build on what they did last week. And I think then we'd have a better picture where Connacht are. Now, if Leinster were to cut loose on Connacht on Friday night, you'd say, well, no, Connacht maybe back where they were the week before, so or 2 weeks before. So I'm reserving my judgment at the moment on Connacht, but I think you have to be fair and say that what we saw last week was a bloody good start to turn the season around.
Yeah. Fiona, like, would just that kind of slow, steady improvement actually just be ideal for Connacht? Because I think last season we would have seen it where their highs were absolutely enormous, but they had some pretty shocking lows throughout the campaign. Like their wins against beating the Bulls at the sports ground last year, beating Ulster at the Aviva Stadium, the win against Munster on New Year's Day. Like, they had all these massive wins throughout the season, but they had some absolutely brutal defeats as well. And if they were to follow up last week's win against Munster with a 30 or 40 point hocking at the hands of Leinster on Friday night, all of a sudden we kind of are back on this podcast next week saying, right, we're kind of back where we started with Connacht, really, aren't we?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think they, at the start of the season, consistency would have been probably a word that the coaching staff might have used, because, as you said, Neil, I mean, we were talking on the pod, I remember last year, about some of the tries scored and how good an attack they were, and then they were just a shambles in defence at times. So that was an area, obviously, they would have looked to fix as well. They were winning games by high scores, but also letting a lot of tries in on them. So I think they will be constantly building. They won't be happy with how they started. You know, they, as you said, Dave Heffernan spoke, they were read the right act. So you saw a gradual performance improvement last week, and they'll be looking out to probably looking at maybe killing. They're very, very good when they can kill Leinster ball, you know, when they can get at Leinster for the first 30, 40 minutes, they're in their head. They're definitely a team that can get at Leinster. And when Jack Carty's at the top of the game, you can see how he is. It depends what type of Leinster squad will be put out as well. But Jack Carty is definitely someone who can really get at that Leinster pack, because we've seen him do it in the past. But I think it's just, if they put in a good performance, they will gradually build for the season. They know where they're at, but they won't have been happy with how they've been playing in the past. So I think on Friday night it'll be performance based. Scoreline, obviously they'll go out with the intention of winning the game, but we know how good and clinical Leinster are. But Connacht will be trying to tighten up that defence and not let Leinster get away from them.
Yeah, and Fiona, like the team selection for the game against Munster was really interesting, where they had Jack Carty back, but they also kept David Hawkshaw on the team, and they put Conor Fitzgerald back to full back, and just kind of flooded the back line with kicking options and kind of exit options. And it worked in large parts as well, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And I mean, Stephen Fitzgerald got a lovely 50-22 as well. I mean, he's a player that's kind of been in and out of the Connacht team. I've been watching him since he left Munster. I've kind of been unsure of how he's settling in. But to see him at 15, I thought it wasn't an excellent game by any means, but I thought he was kind of good enough back there. He made his tackles at times, and he had a very good kicking game. So I wonder, will Connacht be looking at something similar, because it seemed to work for them, especially in that back line. We know how elusive in attack they can be, but defensively, I thought it worked as well.
Yeah, and just flipping on to Leinster then, Eddie, the game against Sharks last week. It was funny. We were on this podcast last week and we had a pretty long conversation about the state rugby. Kind of felt like we felt rugby was in at the moment after that Munster Zebra game, and you'd had the Connacht against the Bulls the previous Friday night as well. These matches that were continually going over 2 hours or flirting with the 2 hour mark. 60-minute first halves, stoppages everywhere, slow games, scrum resets, and it felt like a real bad atmosphere on the podcast last week, I have to say. And then I was at the RDS on Saturday. It was a lovely autumn evening. Conditions were absolutely ideal, and you had two teams that just arrived and said, you know what, we're going to play ball here. And it was one of the most enjoyable games I got to sit through for work in a long, long time. It was a perfect reminder, that game, of just like how good rugby can be when it's played at its best.
Well, it's a very interesting comment you're making there, because to me it's worrying that, you know, I compare it a bit like to Gaelic football, if you don't mind, on a rugby podcast, is that like when you see a good game of Gaelic football, it's outstanding, but you might have to watch 10 of them to see one good one.
Yeah.
And I think the problem at the moment in rugby is we're getting a bit like that. You have to watch 5, 6, 7, 8 rugby games to get one of those barn burners, I call them. That's really riveting to watch. But it was a fantastic, probably the game of the season so far for me, you know, in the URC. It had everything. I do think that you know, it was probably, for me, I have to say, it was a masterclass in attack from Leinster. You know, they just did everything that they needed to do. They just had looked at the Sharks' defence. So the Sharks played a very aggressive blitz defence up and in, where the wingers come up and come in. It's a very hard defence to break down if you go the wrong way about it. There's a lot of pain, but they spotted exactly where the space was. It's pretty obvious against a 4-up defence blitz, is that the space on the outside and getting the ball there is a big problem for a lot of teams. But Leinster gave a masterclass how to do that. So firstly, the number of cross kicks into that space for people staying wide was top drawer, and of course they were all on the money for the most part. And then even the end, the space in behind as well, and Sexton exposed that to score a try. So the kicking game was phenomenal, absolutely perfect, beautifully executed. And then the running game, the way to break a blitz defence is you throw spot passes, which for people who don't coach rugby means you've somebody run hard at the line, you pass behind their back. So defenders have to watch that player, but he doesn't get the ball. And Leinster did that, and they were running double spots and stuff of two different players, and like the Sharks were all over the shop, just tore them to pieces. So if you're to draw up an attacking game plan to crack a 4-up defence for any coach, just sit down and watch that game. That's how you crack a 4-up defence. And they just give a master class in it. So it was wonderful to watch. Fair to the Sharks, they didn't be too accommodating. They came out and they played as well. They've got a bonus point as well, and with tries. So for me, it was the game of the season. Fantastic to watch. Two teams going at it, two teams throwing the ball around, but they weren't just throwing it around because let's throw it around here. They were throwing it around.
Yeah, it was precise. It was very
precise, very well thought out game plans. Yeah. And some of the Sharks' tries were excellent as well. Very well executed, very well thought out. So, like, from even a rugby purist point of view, because sometimes you see these games with high score and you go, yeah, it was entertaining, but geez, the defense was woeful. You know, and there's that, like, I know some people love high scores, but sometimes I'm disgusted about it because the defence don't bother. But I thought in this game, both defences were going at it, but both teams were able to pick each other apart. But certainly Leinster got the upper hand tactically, and they executed brilliantly. So to me, it was a classic. You know, I mean, you could watch that game 2 or 3 times and get something out of it every time.
Yeah, and Fiona, probably good for the league as well, because I think maybe one of the worries this time last year we all had was that when the big South African teams would come up here, if they could pick off one win on their 2 or 3 game series, they might say, all right, that's job done. We can put the feet up now for a couple of weeks. But, you know, the Sharks, they'd won two out of 2 games up here so far. The third one against Leinster, like they had every reason to just kind of take that one handy, didn't they? To just take it as a free shot. But in fairness, they put up a cracking game.
They were so exciting to watch. And, you know, I suppose the thing about Leinster was they were so direct, so efficient. It was hard for the Sharks to defend at times, but I just sat back and watched the game with enjoyment on my face. I mean, it was exciting rugby. Some of the tries scored. I mean, the kick throughs, Nata even having a kick to Henshaw. We saw Henshaw to Ringrose, but I thought Johnny Sexton was excellent as well. I have to say that. You know, a lot of guys come back from injury and they need a couple of, or haven't played for a few games, need to get a few games under the belt. He just simply walks in and takes over, back doing those loop plays, just really on the money with his passing game. He just seems to control everything about that Leinster team, and when he's on, everything seems to be firing. Also he's few words with the ref that we all love to see as well. What
are your thoughts on that? I know some people were a bit irked by it, that maybe he was going a bit far or talking to the referee a little bit too much. Is that the right level of chat to the referee you want to see from your captain?
You know what? I prefer that than no chat at all. I mean, as players around him, they're looking at him. You can see he's fighting for you. Obviously, he saw stuff going on off the ball as well that he wasn't too happy with. And he was backing up his players and sticking up for his players. So, look, he needs to, obviously not the Bundy Aki that we saw a few weeks previous to keeping it up and up, but he seems to have got it on the money just about when to stop and just about not getting before the referee gets really mad. So I think he's done it all his life. He's not going to change, but it's as a team, I think it works for Leinster because you can see he's doing it for his players. He's fired up and he wants the best out of the referee as well.
Where do you sit in that one, Eddie?
I think it's a fine line. I actually have if he thinks there's foul play and the referee missed it, or the assistant referee's missed it, I think he has to be quite animated about that, because that's foul play. And I think he has to challenge the referee and say, look, something happened there. You need to look at it, because you have to protect your players. And I'm not saying referees ignore that, or we know they don't, but sometimes things get missed. So I have no problem with him being kind of, let's say, in the referee's face about foul play. But I think at times he does become overbearing on the referee about other things, like, there was a knock on there,
the run of the middle.
You know, I think that he's got to back off that. Let the referee the game, because if a referee feels badgered about that stuff, because what you're doing is, in that sense, is you're questioning his decision making as a referee. Like, he didn't think it was a knock on, he didn't think it was a forward pass. Why? And badgering him there, I've never seen a referee go, oh, you know what, you're right, that was a forward pass. Like, it's kind of a pointless road to travel. Yeah. I think with the foul play thing, that's different. If he feels one of his players has got a cheap shot or something and it's been missed, I say 100% tell the referee, we're not putting up with this. You need to look at this, and I back him 100% in that. But I think at times he crosses the line on the stuff that you're not going to get any change out of and are not important. And I think what you find in sport in general, it's not rugby, but, you know, they do it in soccer all the time, which is really a disaster area when it comes to dealing with referees. We never want to go there, but they're hoping that the next time, you know, because that 50-50 call didn't go your way, you get the next one. But I don't think it's a good road to travel. I think he could moderate his behavior around certain things to the referees, and I think, you know, referees are going to be told, you know, don't get bullied by him. He's a world-renowned player. He's a huge figure on the field. He's a very imposing guy, but I think he has to tread that line carefully, or it's probably not a good thing to see either. You know, I don't think kids looking on, you know, watching a guy challenging a referee about a forward pass or knock on, or, you know, I don't think it's a good thing for the game. But I will go back and say, if it's foul play and he thinks the referee missed it, 100% to back him to be quite in your face about that. But I think every other thing that's about technical or tactical stuff. You just got to take what the referee says. And if it happens a couple of times, you might ask the referee to say, can you look at that?
Yeah.
Or if you say, I've seen situations where referee penalised at a scrum and they've been boring and said, referee, actually they're boring and can you look at that? That's all fair. But I think at times he does overstep the line on other stuff.
We'll finish up talking about Ulster because it was good to see they showed no sign of a kind of a post Leinster hangover there at the weekend with a really, really strong, really professional win against the Ospreys at Kingspan Stadium. And they're off to South Africa now for their tour. They got the Lions this weekend, first up on Saturday afternoon before the Sharks the following week. And good as well to see James Hume is on the flight. He's obviously been out since suffering that groin injury in New Zealand with Ireland. But incredibly, Fiona, like Ulster really haven't missed him so far this season, because I think every neutral rugby fan in Ireland is kind of delighted to see it. Luke Marshall has returned after a really, really difficult couple of years, and he's been absolutely fantastic.
Oh, he's been so good to watch. And you know what? It's almost like himself and McCluskey are brothers. They just play off each other so well. They read the game together. I just thought, obviously Marshall at the weekend, he did tries and he was really good, but I thought even defensively, he's just been excellent. And this time last season, I was talking about Hume. Someone asked me who I think is going to be like the player that's really going to shoot through. And he has. Obviously, he got injured. He's been excellent. But you're kind of looking now, wondering, will he be able to even get back onto that team to break up that McCluskey-Marshall partnership in the big games, because it's been working really, really well for Ulster. And I have to say, like, Ulster as well, going into that game last week, making 9 changes, you wouldn't have even thought that. Everything just looks cohesive. They all seem to be on the same page. Great to see Vermeulen back again as well, carrying big balls. And the likes of Ray, I haven't spoke about him in the past. I've seen him play, but I think he's been in absolute great form as well, coming off the bench and making a big impact in that game. It's excellent. It's a team that's really exciting to watch. I'm talking about guys in the pack, but we all know how electric their back line is at the minute as well.
Yeah, they've got a good blend at the moment, Eddie. Like, they really look like a team and a squad that knows where they're going in each and every game. Yeah,
they're in a very good place, actually. They're playing some fantastic rugby. And even the game they lost up on Ravenhill that night was a monsoon. I was up there at the game, and the rain ruined the game. But they actually looked really second best for an hour, and somehow they found a way back into the game. And to be fair, they probably deserved a draw if Sexton had lost the ball.
But they were doing the opposite of that last year, where they were playing really well for an hour, and then they were chucking games away or coming very close to chucking away games in the final quarter. So they seem to have addressed that side of things as well.
Well, it was interesting that they got a bad start to the game. Now, Leinster had their homework done. They shut down McCluskey. Yes. And then they got sucker punched twice, in the sense that Leinster got a try from a really well-worked try in bad conditions, and with just over an overlap. And then, Leinster walked them into the in goal with a maul. So they were in a bad place. And then they tried to force the game to get back into it. And they got worse and worse and worse. And Leinster had a chance to bury them at one stage. They had 2 lineouts down in the corner, and Ulster held on, and they seemed to wake up, and the crowd got behind them, and they just got their composure back, and they scored a great try from a maul, and then they basically had Leinster opened up, and Sexton, I was in that corner, he had the ball in the wrong hand and lost it in the contact, and that sucked the energy out of him. But that game, you could park on the basis that the conditions were horrendous. Like, nobody could play rugby. I mean, Leinster got their scores early in the game when you could play a little bit. And what Leinster had to do really was just not do anything for the rest of the game and just keep the spread, and they got away with it. But I think Leo was very relieved to get out of that game. So part of that game is that it was a bit of a one-off in many ways. I think Ulster are in a great place. They've got really good, solid pack. Some of their ball carriers are really giving a good go forward. But I think their midfield fulcrum has really been the key. And again, I'm beating the McCluskey drum here. He's been key to them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know you're a
big fan.
But I think they're getting enough credit.
The wider point is, like, they're getting depth all around the pitch there.
Yeah, but I think I was going to say, like, what I'm going to say on the back of the McCluskey is that Hume is a different animal now. I mean, like, Marshall has been doing a great job, like, but I think Hume brings another dimension to it, because capacity to beat players one-on-one. Like, with Marshall and McCluskey, you're getting pretty much fairly direct rugby a lot of the time. But I think Hume brings another dimension now. So they're even going to be more dangerous, I think, if Hume is back to his form from last year. So I think, look, overall, Ulster are in a great spot. If they can go down to South Africa now and even pick up one result and maybe another bonus point in some way, like a try bonus point or something, they come back home, they're going to be in great fettle, you know. So I think they're the other province at the moment that are going to sit back and say, yeah, things are working well for us. I think Leinster are in a good place, obviously. I think Connacht are looking to try and kind of build on what they got last week, but I think Munster at some point need to start the engine here, and hopefully the sooner the better.
Yeah, and Fiona, the last point on Ulster then as well, like they're clearly going all out now with the signings over the last week. Like that is a massive statement. They got Rory Sutherland coming in. He's on that trip to South Africa as well, so he's probably going to make a debut in the next week or so. So he's there till the end of the season, and then they've kind of teased out the arrival of a world-class proven operator, which they haven't named, but I think all of us know at this stage is Stephen Kitshoff of the Stormers. Two massive players, like for the next 3-4 years, that they're kind of securing top quality options at loosehead. And if you see the signings they've made over the last few years, they're clearly putting a big emphasis on type 5 players.
Yeah, definitely. You can see that they've Henderson as well to come back in as well in their next few games. They're just a big physical dominant pack. That when I saw that those signings, you can see their intent. And you know, Ulster haven't won a European Cup, and I'm sure that's where they're going. They were so close last year as well. You know, I'm sure they looked at it and they kind of almost faded towards the end of the season. They might have had a few injuries. There was definitely a couple of games where there was some of the props were injured, and the guys that stepped up maybe weren't up to scratch. So they're really putting their foot forward now, signing these guys. They probably have at the minute, like as well as Leinster, they just have, as I said, with the 9 changes, they'll have a squad that they can constantly rotate. And when it comes to the big games, guys are fit and fresh and ready to go, and a pretty big dominant pack. We all know what Kitshoff can do. We can see, even though sometimes he mightn't start in that South African pack, but he gets on a lot of the time before half time and he does real damage in the scrum. And also a huge ball carrier, and Sutherland is similar as well. So it's really looking really good for Ulster Rugby going forward, and especially when they meet those French big packs as well going forward in the Heineken Cup.
Yeah, Eddie, like it's clear, like I know Dan McFarland obviously he was a front row in his day, so he obviously places a big importance on it, but they're clearly making a big statement with these signings.
Well, I think they're making a statement on the basis that they feel that that's the part of their squad that they've got to bolster in terms of getting silverware. If you look at the Ulster backline, it's a cracking good backline. They've got 2 good 10s, not world beaters, but really solid 10s who can run a game. Nice. They've got real power in the midfield, and they've got serious gas in the back 3. So I think like their backline is really, really good, really set, and they're confident over the next few years that backline is going to hold together really well. But of course, the key for them is, can they deliver the quality possession in their backline, their set piece and their truckers, and I think that's they're investing their energy and their finances in, is to put a pack in front of that backline that can deliver the sort of possession that they know. So it's a smart move, I think, from a point of view, building a team, building a squad. They're putting their resources where they feel that's going to get them across the line when they get to the big games in Europe against as Fiona said, the big French teams. When you go toe to toe with teams in France away from home on a Sunday afternoon, and you got a pack of forwards that are going to hold their own at least, and then because the Ulster backs, that Ulster back unit is as good as you're going to get in terms of their skill set and the way they're playing. So I think that's their logic. Let's give them a platform to launch this backline, and I think, on the evidence of it, that's where they're going with it, and it makes good business sense.
Yeah, let's see how it works over the next couple of seasons. So Ulster against Lions, that game kicks off 1:00 on Saturday afternoon. Then Friday night 7:35, Connacht against Leinster. As I said, that game is live on RT2 and RT Player. And then Saturday evening 7:35 kickoff, Munster hosting the Bulls at Thomond Park. Eddie and Fiona, thanks a million for joining us. Good luck at your games this week. Eddie, you're down in Highfield. You were telling us that's going to be a tough one.
Yeah. I think the last time I was in Highfield, I was playing under 12, so.
Long time ago, Eddie.
Oh, half a century, Fiona.
Who have you got, Fiona, this week?
Yeah, we're actually off. We were due to play Malone, but they're no longer in the league, so we get to have a weekend off.
So you get to watch Munster instead.
I get to go watch Munster.
Well, listen, enjoy it, and I might see you down in Thomond Park. I'll keep an eye out for you. I'll be there myself. Eddie and Fiona, thanks a million for joining us, and thanks a million for everyone for listening to the RTÉ Rugby podcast. We'll speak to you again next week.
Cheers.